So today I'm going to do another of my domino theory videos, and this one is really crazy, especially the end, because the end is just amazing. And I'm going to talk about how sugar eventually led to a thing with Mexico. So really it's the sugar tax of 1760, how it led to one guy either trying to conquer Mexico or trying to conquer a small part of the US for himself. So that's quite fun. Anyway, let's get right into it. So we have the sugar tax of 1760, which I don't need to say was quite tough and obviously unpopular. And this was mainly because the colonies had just come out of the 7 Years' War or the French and Indian War or whatever. By the way, kind of started by George Washington. And, well, the country needed to get back on its feet, although, the colonies, and they weren't doing too badly, but the government still increased the taxes. Well, 1760 or 1765? No, 1760, I think, and then 1765 was the stamp tax. Anyway, they were, the main ones were the sugar tax and the Stamp Act. And that was a huge act and a huge deal because, again, extremely unfair. Literally anything with a piece of paper you could get stamped and you had to tax. They had to tax them at the stamp. And, of course, extremely unpopular because it's taxes. Who on earth likes paying taxes? So, of course, the colonies, they were extremely angry because they feel like they didn't deserve to be taxed so much. If anything, people in Britain should be the ones being taxed. After all, they were the ones managing the colonies. They should be the ones paying the high prices. And the thing that really, hurt them was that they weren't there when they were deciding the taxes. So you probably heard the whole no taxation without representation. If they weren't able to attend Parliament, where should they be taxed? According to what Parliament said, they weren't involved in the decision. They couldn't put their point of view forward. That really angered people. And it really got to a point where they were so fed up that in 1770, you have the Boston Massacre. I've talked about this before, but five people died in this altercation between the people of Boston and a group of British soldiers. By the way, I've said this before, but kind of cool that the lawyer representing the British soldiers was none other than John Adams himself. Well, anyway, a few years after that, in 1775, you have 1773, sorry, you have the Boston Tea Party. Again, I have talked about this before because I love this period, but people in, again, Boston Harbor, because Boston was the center of anti-British sentiment at the time, they went on this boat carrying tea and threw so much tea out of the ship. One of the reasons was to hurt the British economically. The second one was because they knew how much tea was important to the British, the cultural impact of tea. So by throwing tea into the sea and hurting, not only hurting sales, but just the symbolism behind throwing this piece of iconic British culture, that was the colonies saying, we don't give a crap about the British. And then in 1775, the Continental Army was formed because tensions were so high, the only way they could be resolved was with an army. There was just no other way to do things. And after that, by the way, headed by George Washington, and after that, it got to a point where just fighting back wasn't enough. They needed to be independent. And in 1776, on the 2nd of July of 1776, the Declaration of Independence was put forward and formalized on the 4th of July. Thomas Jefferson was the guy who did that. So yeah, the whole American Revolutionary War, and well, just prior to the signing of the Declaration of Independence in 1775, two men joined the Continental Army. These two men turned out to be key to American politics. Of course, I am talking about Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr. I always struggle saying his name. Aaron Burr. Just too many R's. And Burr, he is like lieutenant general in the army at some point, and Hamilton is Washington's aide-de-camp. He eventually leaves, and they both fight in the war. And when the war ends with a colony victory, now the United States, after the Constitution was formalized in 1787, these men go on steady low. And they work on cases together. They're quite near each other in Wall Street, I think it was. And they were head to head right at the beginning of the law practices. Of course, Hamilton, he had a bit of an advantage. He was just really good at it, and he ended up rising more and more quickly. The reason I said why Hamilton had an advantage is because he had been Washington's aide-de-camp, and he had a foot in with Washington. So by the time it came to George Washington being voted president and him having to assemble a cabinet, well, Hamilton was naturally going to be in it as Secretary of Treasury. Now, Hamilton, he was famous for just taking any chance. He was really headstrong and ambitious, and he wouldn't give up. He was relentless, and he just kept on pursuing his dreams and just kept on pushing forward to more and more prestigious places in the American government. Burr, however, he was more cautious. He thought, if I observe from a distance what's happening, I can think of the best way to advance and therefore come out victorious. Two completely different approaches. Both men they were in court together, they did trials together, and in fact, after the Reynolds affair, Maria Reynolds, she ended up divorcing James Reynolds, and the lawyer who represented Maria Reynolds was Aaron Burr. Yeah. Then the lawyer that prosecuted Burr after a trial in 1807, which more on that later, was Aaron Burr Jr., something like that. Not Aaron Burr Jr., sorry, Alexander Hamilton Jr. Sorry. Anyway, not really important. So it got to a point where Burr decided, okay, enough's enough. I just keep on seeing Hamilton succeeding whilst I'm being left behind. So he decides to run for senator of New York. And he wins. However, this does not fall quite right with Hamilton because the incumbent had been the father of Eliza Schuyler, Colonel Philip Schuyler. And of course, that didn't quite sit quite right with Hamilton because his father-in-law had just been displaced, but this guy he had known for ages, who in his eyes wasn't fit for American politics. He was not he wouldn't survive in American politics. So that really, I think it was that moment on that really started the tensions between these two men. Then you have the whole election of 1800 deal that was. So it was. I'm talking about Democratic Republican primaries, because there weren't primaries back then, but they were choosing who was the main candidate of the Democratic Republican Party. Hamilton was no longer in government after the Maria Reynolds affair. Jefferson was no longer in government because he himself had quit, as well as Hamilton, but Jefferson, because of the French Revolution, his views on it, and of course having to deal with Hamilton. And so you have both men not being directly involved, and Burr being senator. So the issue of 1800, it comes head to head between Burr and Jefferson. I'm talking, it's extremely close. Like, way too close. So close that literally the influence of some politician could possibly sway the vote to one's favor. And Hamilton was said politician. And he actually ended up advocating for Jefferson and vouching for Jefferson, saying, hey, it should be Jefferson, only because he just hated Burr so much more. There's actually a really famous Hamilton quote saying, well, not famous, but a really good Hamilton quote, saying that he felt it to be his godly duty to stop Burr from advancing in American politics. I'm paraphrasing, of course, I don't know the exact quote. Anyway, so Burr, he came second in the election. Thomas Jefferson won, he became president, so Burr became vice president. But in 1804, Jefferson got fed up with Burr and thought, why should the guy who comes in second get to be vice president? And of course, he was president, so he could change that, and he did. So Burr was kicked out of office. Now, what could he do? Well, he could just run for governor, right? Simple enough. And he did. He ran for governor of New York. In the election, things were going smoothly, and the guy had good reputation. He was ambitious. He had been vice president of the country. He was the perfect fit. However, here comes Hamilton saying, oh look, we have Burr here trying to advance in American politics. I don't think so. And he ended up publishing pamphlets and just doing whatever he could to stop Burr from advancing. And he did. He actually managed to get Burr to lose the election. So this, understandably enough, pissed off Burr. And, well, because they talked through a mutual friend, they ended up setting up a meeting. And by meeting, I do mean a duel. I made a video on this duel, so if you want to check that out, it's really good. But this duel happened on July 11th, 1804, and despite not being in any of the men's interest in killing each other, Burr ended up fatally wounding Hamilton, who died the next day. Now, by this point, Burr's political career was pretty much dead, and as well as Hamilton. But after the duel, which was legal, it became even worse. He wasn't really prosecuted for it, but still. But it got to a point where Burr thought, I need to take things like really for myself. I can't just let another Hamilton come in and push me aside. So he looked at Texas. It was around 1804, 1805, 1806. This had already started before Hamilton died, but it really got, more and more interesting after Hamilton's death. He thought, okay, I'm going to raise an army. Because if I want to be at the top of my country, I can do one or two things. Invade another country for my country, or invade parts of my own country and turn into a new country ruled by me. Now, you could either invade Mexico or invade part of the US, Texas, or in that area. I mean, right there. And this is called the Burr conspiracy. And he tried, he had the army, failed completely, he got tried in court, think the prosecutor was Alexander Hamilton Jr., which must have been really awkward. And yeah, I mean, that is pretty much it. And all because of the sugar tax and the stamp tax. Well, really, the French and Indian War, and I could go further back. But it's just because of this one tax led to this revolt, which led to these people throwing tea of a vote, which led to revolution, which led to new government being set up, which led to elections, which led to people advancing in elections, which led to rivalries in politics, which led to one guy killing another guy and committing political suicide, and then that guy just going bananas and trying to invade either Mexico or his own country. And yeah, that is it. So I'm gonna leave it there. So yeah, I have nothing else to say, so I've said so. But anyway, I hope you liked it. I hope you found it interesting, and yeah, thank you for watching. Bye.